Writing the West. Stories and poems by Rick Stever. Read by Michael Messner and friends. Outlaw. Al Jennings was a buckaroo. He worked the long cattle drives from Texas to the railroad towns in Kansas and Missouri until the day a lawman killed his brother. After that, he embarked on a career of holding up stages and robbing trains. Mrs. Durkee, a homesteader on the plains, recalled her meeting with the notorious Al Jennings.
It was a hot summer day, the heat shimmering in waves when I first spotted him a long way out, him afoot, making his way toward our cabin. My husband was gone away to town getting supplies, and I was alone with two small children, one a babe in my arms. I could only speculate about the circumstances that would cause a man to be afoot in this land of great distances. At last the traveler arrived and stood in the shade of the porch. He was a tall man, slender with a kindly expression in his eyes. He told me,
"Ma'am, I need to borrow a horse. I'll take good care of him, not ride him too hard or too far, and I'll send him back to you safe and sound."
As payment, he offered to leave his gold watch with me. We only had one saddle horse, but I could not refuse a man in such desperate straits. After he departed, I looked at the watch and noticed the name A.J. Jennings engraved on the back of the case. It gave me a start to discover the stranger was a wanted criminal. The following morning, a settler who lived west of us returned our horse, and the day after that, my husband arrived home. He had ridden as fast as he could because he was concerned about me. He said that a train was robbed near Dodge City, and the sheriff believed A.J. Jennings and his gang were responsible and headed in this direction.
The legend has it that Al Jennings kept running until he reached a place where no one knew him. It is said that he changed his ways and became a successful evangelist out in the Northwest. Games. The children of the Oregon Trail had to leave most of their toys behind, but there was no lack of imagination when it came to finding new playthings along the way. One of the favorite games of young boys on a wagon train in 1843 was played with the swollen paunch of a slaughtered ox. Jesse Applegate, who was 7 years old at the time, described how the game was played.
"Now, in this game, you'd run and butt your head against the paunch, and then it'd bounce you back. Now, that became a favorite game of youngsters, as they showed their courage by running and jumping harder and harder. And now there was no particular name for that game until the day a boy named Andy, with cries of 'Give her gosh, Andy!' ringing in his ears, he jumped at the paunch harder than anyone had ever dared. Well, sir, Andy backed off much further than anyone had ever done it before, and then charged the paunch at the top of speed. And within a couple of yards of the target, leaped up from the ground and come down like a pile driver against the paunch. But he didn't bounce it back."
As it turned out, the stomach had closed so tightly around the boy's neck that he couldn't withdraw his head. Well, the other children took hold of his legs and pulled him out, but the joke was on Andy, and "Give her gosh, Andy!" was a favorite game among the boys for a long time after. If I Believe. I was with a friend when she asked if I believed that God was real. My answer came in the form of posing a few questions. Have you ever watched the moon rise? Been out at daybreak as birds come alive? Ever watched a calf being born and seen the first few urgent puffs of breath on a frosty morn? Ridden over a hill and been surprised by a hidden valley? Have you ever been out in the woods at night and listened to the conversation of two owls or heard a pack of coyotes sing? Have you ever held a son or a daughter in your arms for the first time and felt the wondrous spiritual bond between yourself and your baby? If you had done any of those things, there would be no need to ask such a silly question. Not guilty. Edward Gardner was a hermit. He hunted and fished in the Coast Range and came to town only when he ran low on tobacco. It was tobacco that nearly cost him his freedom. Gardner smoked a pipe. The one time he tapped the ashes on a rock and went on about his business. At a later date, he discovered a fire had burned 3 acres of underbrush around the rock. An eyewitness saw Gardner tap out the ashes and turned him in to authorities for causing a forest fire. Gardner was named in a secret grand jury indictment in Portland. Well, eventually news reached the southern Oregon coast, and Gardner decided to come in on his own. He hiked to Grants Pass, the nearest railhead, and took the train north to Portland, where he appeared before Judge Bean in U.S. District Court.
I heard you was looking for me.
Judge Bean searched the file.
Gardner. Edward G. Yes, here it is. The charge is willfully setting fire to a large section of the Siskiyou National Forest. And how do you wish to plead?
Gardner pulled himself straight.
Not guilty, Your Honor.
He explained the fire had destroyed only underbrush and had burned itself out in 3 acres. He told of how he had walked 127 miles to the railhead and taken the train another 200 miles to Portland. The judge drew a long breath and concluded,
Be more careful in the future, Mr. Gardner. Case dismissed.
Comanche Attack. On a May morning in 1834, a 6-man trapping party headed by Joe Meek and Kit Carson was crossing the open country between the Arkansas and Cimarron rivers on their way to the annual rendezvous. A war party of 200 mounted Comanches spotted them and attacked. The trappers, mounted on mules, knew there was no hope of escape. They brought the mules into a tight circle, drew their knives and cut the mules' throats, holding firmly to the reins and directing that in death the mules should maintain the circle. The Comanches were almost to the makeshift breastwork when shots rang out, and 3 Comanche, including the medicine man, fell dead. The trappers had agreed that 3 men should fire, while the others handed their rifles forward and reloaded. The Comanches retreated to choose a new medicine man to lead them into battle. Again and again, the Comanches attacked the fortress. Meek said of that day,
The burning sun scorched us to faintness. Our faces were begrimed with powder and dust, our throats parched and tongues swollen with thirst, and our bodies aching from our cramped position. At length, the sun set on that bloody and wearisome day. 42 Comanches was dead. They withdrew to mourn over their dead and hold council.
The 6 mountain men moved in a steady dog trot all through the night. They ran 75 miles before coming to water, and another 75 miles before arriving empty-handed at the rendezvous. You've been listening to Writing the West. The stories and poetry in this podcast are by Rick Stieber and appear in books by him. Log on to www.rickstieberauthor.com to find out more. This program was produced by Michael Messner by permission of the author. Special thanks to Michael Tucker, Rachel Pulliam, and Art Shingler. Thank you for listening.